disability is a strength and that it's something that adds value to business and that it is something that touches each of us.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Well, I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest, Jill Houghton, President and CEO of Disability In, the world's leading nonprofit resource for advancing business, disability inclusion, and accessibility. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. Number one, Jill is transforming global business practices. Under her leadership, Disability In has partnered with over 550 multinational companies to embed disability inclusion across their workforces, supply chains, and leadership pipelines. Through initiatives like the groundbreaking Disability Index, she's helping organizations turn commitments into measurable action. Number two, Jill is reshaping how inclusion shows up in governance and policy. She advises top regulators, legislators, and financial leaders on integrating disability as a core business and ESG metric, ensuring inclusion isn't just a workforce conversation, but a boardroom imperative. And number three, her influence is felt worldwide. From leading Disability In to earn consultative status at the United Nations to driving the IMF's first ever accessibility and inclusion external review, Jill's impact has been recognized by Business Insider, and under her leadership, Disability In has earned accolades from Fast Company, including Brands That Matter and Best Workplaces for Innovators. She also lends her voice and leadership to advisory boards from the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital to the M&M's Fund, reflecting her belief that lasting inclusion begins with community, connection, and storytelling. Jill, you have been called a global changemaker for inclusion, a visionary for equitable leadership, and one of Business Insider's 100 People Transforming Business. Today, we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction.
You're very welcome. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I've seen your work from the outside for many years. You have just such an amazing reputation as a change maker in business. And I thought where we might start is, something you've said. You've said disability is a strength and a natural part of the human experience, but often society focuses on what people can't do. So I wondered if you could tell us what shaped your own perspective on disability and how do you guide others to reframe how they see it themselves?
Ironically, I grew up in a little town in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, right? Where people honk to say hello. And I have a learning disability. And it was something that I didn't put out there openly. It was something I was embarrassed by, right? I thought it made me less than or feel stupid. I think on my journey in life, when I wanted to go to law school and didn't pass my entrance exam, it put me on this path to say, like, okay, so what can I do? And that took me to DC. I was an intern for Senator Dole during the early stages and drafting of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'll tell you, I ended up after that taking a job in Indianapolis in an organization that served people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I helped a young woman get a job. And when I saw what employment meant to her, that it wasn't just a paycheck, but that it was about being included and having friends and being part of her community, I knew why I existed and I never looked back. And at Disability In, we have this incredible opportunity to work with business to really reframe disability as that competitive advantage. And it's such a gift, right? Because disability is a source of insight. It helps companies be more adaptable and innovative. And when we listen and engage with our disabled talent, we actually come out with better products, services, and systems that work for everybody.
I love that. And I love that your history with this goes all the way back to working for Senator Dole at the time that the Americans with Disability Act was drafted. So, I mean, you've seen the full circle of this, and you've led disability in since its earliest days. You've helped grow it into what is really a global force now. Um, what was your vision when you came into the organization, and how has that evolved as more and more companies have embraced this work?
I think the one thing that we knew in the early days of the Americans with Disabilities Act was that it was this beautiful bipartisan piece of legislation that was providing access to all. But we also knew, I think that the leaders that drafted this piece of legislation knew that you can have the best legislation in the world, but it doesn't change attitudes. And so coming into Disability In and working with this movement, in my heart and soul, I knew that business has the power to change the world if it's good for business, right? Not just because it's something nice to do, but because it's good for business. And so when we first started building this movement, it was really focused on employment. And I think that as we've been on this journey and working to advance this movement, what we have evolved and learned is that it's not just about employment, right? But it's about the business because disability lives everywhere within the business. And it's about our suppliers and our employees and our customers. So it's really about the whole ecosystem.
When what I'm hearing from you is when we think about, influence, the topic of this show, and the different ways that we can influence. Obviously, public policy is a very powerful way to influence others and influence the world. But, you're saying you had this realization that business really isn't as a key to that. Um, what helped you realize that public policy isn't the only way that we can influence these outcomes, but that it has to go broader? And I'd love to just hear how you've learned how to influence others along the way, particularly the business community.
So I think along my journey, I had the opportunity to meet a CEO of a company that had employed people with disabilities. And he very intentionally had worked to recruit and hire and advance and grow talent with disabilities. And he thought it made good business sense. And he wanted to tell people up and down his block. And I knew about this movement. And so it was, and I wasn't sure about this movement. I thought, does it is it really making a difference? And so, I said to him, like, let's get involved. Let's get involved in this movement. And we got involved in the movement. And when I saw up close and personal a CEO publicly talking about why this was good for their business, and I saw other companies really hungry to learn, like, tell me more. And I want to do it better. Um, I, I got intrigued with that business really is competitive and that they have the power to change the world. And so that's what Disability In is all about. And really, these frenemies, if you will. I mean, they're competitors coming together in tech and healthcare and financial services, and they're actually helping each other to
Yes.
advance disability inclusion. And I would say that they have come to Disability In over the years, and they have asked us, where do we get started on this journey, and what does good look like?
Yes.
And a key to that has really been giving birth to the disability index, which is really now 12 years old, um, and was designed to help people measure, right? Measure their actions because what gets measured matters.
That's a great segue because I wanted to ask you more about the disability index as you were talking about the frenemies, the competitors coming together and working with one another. It occurred to me, competition and peer pressure are very powerful forces for influence, right? Because we rise to the occasion when we see someone next to us doing something, especially in your example, it's good for their business. And we say, well, wait a minute, maybe I should be doing that thing and I should work harder. And it occurs to me that the disability index, this tool for advancing inclusion in the business world that you've developed, is a really great way to bring those folks together and to, get them to, I don't know if you'd use the word compete, but right, it does create that positive peer pressure. So what is the index? Why does it matter? Um, and how have you modernized it or evolved it over the last 12 or so years since you launched it?
So I'll tell you this, when we started on this journey, I went to one of the nation's top disability rights attorneys and 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 pitched him on this concept of creating this index. And I asked him what his guidance was. And he gave me one of the best pieces of advice that has been instrumental on this journey. And he said, Jill, you can come up with what you think are the best questions in the universe. But if a general counsel, if legal inside these big multinational companies says that the questions are not legal and the company cannot answer them, then
Yes,
what you've come up with is a tool that will help no one.
yes.
So, with that guidance, we brought together talent with disabilities and allies from inside these multinational corporations to create this tool, right? That looks at things like culture and leadership and employment practices and enterprise wide access and community engagement and supplier inclusion and, looking at a wide range of topics, right? And drilling down and identifying actions that companies need to take to advance on this journey. Now, yes, over the course of the last 2 years, we've been working closely with participating companies, as well as companies from around the globe that haven't participated to gain their feedback in terms of how can we best modernize the disability index to be that tool that data driven that results in that data driven roadmap. And so we're now modernizing this to be more of a global tool to meet that demand, and we are coming up with new maturity models. People are hungry for maturity models and wanting to know where they stack up in their industry and against their peers. We're creating flexible participation options so that companies can participate enterprise wide or they can participate at a company level in
Yeah.
a specific region. We've improved reporting options. We've got a new self-service platform. And I think most importantly, in addition, a nice bonus is we've created new reports that are more meaningful and made participation complementary.
Yeah.
So I would say we're getting ready to roll this out in January. Really anxious to get this into the hands of companies around the globe because we know that what gets measured matters. And this is a tool to help them identify actions that they can take on the journey to being more disability inclusive.
What do you hope will come of this if you fast forward like 5 years? What impact do you hope this new modernized disability index will make?
We want companies from all over the globe participating, not to just participate, but to actually take it, right? And
Sure.
to engage with their people internally.
Yes.
Get your executive sponsor that's championing disability. Get your employee resource group that's composed of people who are disabled. And use this as a roadmap to go inside to different parts of the business, to the technology arm, to your marketing arm, to your procurement arm, to your finance arm, and make the case to embed consciously, intentionally disability inclusion into everything that you do.
Yeah, and I think that's so, powerful, that vision of it's not just a one and done, how do you stack up, but how can you use this as a tool to achieve your goals, to improve? How can you make it more collaborative and participatory back within your organization? Um, and I can really see how that makes it more attractive for a company to want to participate because it gives them the expertise and the roadmap to be able to, make positive change so they can modernize their business in a world that is fast changing where we all have to, don't we?
That's right. Absolutely. And it's an opportunity, right? Because
Mhm.
things like accessibility and disability inclusion live at the intersection of everything.
Yeah. When we think about the topic of influence, sometimes folks can think that, okay, well, influence is about getting people to do something, take whatever action I want, and then we're done. But one of the things I love about your perspective, Jill, is that you talk about getting companies to take action, but then to talk about that action so that they can influence others. It's like a further step in the cycle, which we don't always hear people talk about. So, can you tell us like your kind of point of view on how you get folks to do that and why you get folks to do that and why that visibility piece is so important when you're building momentum for a movement like disability inclusion?
I mean, we know that visibility creates momentum, right? And that business is driven by competition. And what we want to do is we want to find ways to encourage them to talk about it publicly, uh, as well as internally plant seeds. So, I had this really unique opportunity last week where there's an individual who happens to identify as being blind. She's leading accessibility inside this company, and she's internally working to create visibility around disability inclusion and had the opportunity to plant a seed. So, disability in planted us in, and we had the opportunity to engage with the CEO of this multinational company, along with some of their board members, to not just talk about uh, what's happening today, but to look forward, right? To look at the next 5 years and to talk about the trends and how disability inclusion is actually good for business and can help lead them into the future. So, for example, things like neurodiversity, right? We know that 53% of Gen Z identify as being neurodiverse, and perhaps up to 70% of Gen Alpha. So, what can business do to get ready to attract, retain, and grow this talent who, oh, by the way, has these skills around, cybersecurity and AI and resilience and technical literacy, which are all skills that business need to transform their business in the future. So, we're creating this momentum and this visibility by creating opportunities to continue to plant these seeds along with demonstrating through things like our research with Accenture that demonstrates that, you know, business these businesses that prioritize disability inclusion, that build it into their metrics, actually have 28% higher revenue, 2 times net income. The list goes on, right? Like that it pays to be disability inclusive.
Yeah. As you talked about that and we use sort of different language, I wanted to ask you, language is a really important part of influence, the way we describe things. And when it comes to inclusion, language evolves, right? So in the world of disability, language has obviously evolved across our lives, across your career. And especially like, language even like now that might be new to some people, like neurodiversity. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how you've navigated that and how you helped your stakeholders navigate that because it's such an important part of influence and sometimes it can trip people up a little bit too.
Absolutely. I think language can trip people up. What we've done at Disability In is really intentionally leaned in to listening to our partners.
Whoa.
So we have been out there on a listening tour to learn about messaging and what our partners need, right? That they need data and insights and that they need messaging. And one of the best places to get messaging around disability is from your people. And
Mm.
many of our partners, I would say the large majority, probably over 90% of our partners, have some kind of an affinity group or a business resource group where people who identify as being disabled or neurodiverse come together. And it's a great source of information to have those conversations around language and to lean in and to make sure that our language is evolving. I'll never forget, this was a while ago when we first started on the kind of global expansion efforts. We had a meeting with some business leaders, and we also had a woman who has since passed away named Judy Heumann, who was one of the icons, the godmother of the disability rights movement. And we were in a room and people were trying to call disability something else, right? They were on that language train. Uh, differently abled, diverse, uh, special needs, all these different names. And I'll never forget that moment where Judy said, "We fought so hard for the right to be who we are, to be called disabled. And that doesn't mean we're broken, right? It's just a natural part of the human experience. It's part of who we are. And so please use the word disability and use it with pride." And
Yeah.
so at Disability In, that's why disability is in our name. That's why the index is the disability index, because we believe that disability is beautiful and that it's just a unique part of the human experience.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. And I just think that's such a great story, but also a great lesson for any leader. Sometimes, you got a bunch of people sitting around a table trying to say, well, what's the term? And, we need to change this. Go ask the people, go to like you said, and you've helped so much with this, so many employee resource groups and affinity groups across companies, but, go to where the people are and listen to them. And there's not always going to be a perfect right answer where everybody agrees, but you can certainly inform. And I think, a lesson I've learned through these interviews is so many leaders have given examples like you just gave of, how influence is really a two-way street. You have to allow yourself to be influenced. And what a wonderful story about that quote from Judy. Thank you for sharing that. I think it underscores how much leadership really matters in this work, from setting the tone at the top to engaging authentically with employees. And I wonder if you could just share any other stories of leaders who've really influenced meaningful change inside their organizations, because I know you've interacted with so many.
A story that I like to tell is about a woman who, when I met her, she was somebody working in a tech company. She was working on, uh, you know, email, and she was deaf. And she hired into her company and she faked that she could hear because, of course, she was afraid if she told people that she was deaf, she wouldn't get the job. So it was a point at which she was about ready to lose the job, right? Like she got in, but she couldn't really, obviously, she couldn't hear. So she was getting bits and pieces by reading people's lips, and she wasn't getting everything that she needed to know to be able to function effectively in her job. So she came to this moment where she had to come out and identify that she was a person with a disability and that she needed an accommodation. And in this case, the company provided her with the accommodation. And, if we fast forward to today, and she's very public with her story, so I think I can share. Her name's Jenny LeFleury, and she's the chief accessibility officer at Microsoft. She's one
Wow.
of the first chief accessibility officers in the world.
Eh,
And she openly identifies as being deaf. And I tell that story because she is a senior leader and she tells her story. And I can't tell you the number of times when we've been somewhere, like I was at a financial services, very top tier investors, closed door, there were members of big multinational board of directors in the room, et cetera. And I shared Jenny's story. And one of the top people in the room pulled me aside. Now, mind you, I've been in meetings with this person and never knew. And he said, "That's me."
eh,
He said, "I use Google Meet on my phone and turn the captions on so that I can participate fully. But people don't really know what I'm doing. And they
eh.
certainly don't know that I'm deaf."
Wow. You know, so many of us probably never thought about someone with a disability having to come out as that example you shared or make the decision not to because, they're worried. And I think it really highlights the power of influence inside of a company and the culture to unlock the most talent from the people you have. I mean, these folks you gave as an example. Um, and you're helping to shift that culture inside of companies. And I wonder if you could just share, like, how have you broken through within companies, or how have you seen companies break through within their own ranks? I suspect it could be tricky sometimes in large organizations to get a commitment that might be made at the very top to sort of move down throughout, an organization. Some of these companies have hundreds of thousands of employees. But what have you seen that works? And I'm kind of even thinking of lessons that might apply to company cultures that may not have to do with disability inclusion specifically, but where there might be some lessons that others could pick up on.
One of my favorite stories to just like make this human is a very large financial services company who they one of their senior leaders came to our conference. We have this big conference where we bring business together, right, from across the business. And so the senior leader came and we didn't even know that they were there, right? Uh, had a life-changing experience, he says, because he got connected with some of our next gen, some of our college students with disabilities that we had there. And so he followed up and he said, I want to get involved, get our company to take the index, and I want to get involved with your next gen. And he said, but I'm not sure how best to do that. We do this thing called National Day of Service, where we bring students in and they get to shadow the CEO and they get to go and round and meet different senior leaders. And so he said, I'm kind of thinking that we take something that we naturally do as a company already, and then we infuse students with disabilities into that thing that we do. And so Disability Immobilized, and we brought 10 uh, diverse students with disabilities to that day of service, and they got to shadow the CEO of the company.
Hmm.
And the conversations that they had with him flipped a switch for him. And from that moment on, this leader was just on fire with holding his company accountable to the point of he was even weaving the disability index and their results into their shareholder meetings. just really went above and beyond. We did a bell ringing at the New York Stock Exchange together around a major anniversary of the New York Stock Exchange. And to the point of he brought all the senior leaders together and we were prepping for this event. And he was like, we need to get some nonprofits in here. We need people with disabilities. And I said, that's a great idea. And guess what? You already have people in this room, 1 in 4 of us. And his number 2, she raised her
Hmm.
hand and she told her story.
Hmm.
And she has dyslexia and she talked about her own disability. And so, sometimes it's looking at natural things that your company already does and then working to infuse intentionally disability into your work. And that can lead to some amazing outcomes.
Yeah. Jill, as you've talked, something that you've done several times I love is you said, let me tell you a story. And you have a great story to illustrate the point. And in your last story, you sort of actually highlighted that an employee, the number 2, sharing her story was powerful. So storytelling obviously is just a really important part of influence, something that you do so well. How, I mean, you kind of gave an example of this, but I want to go deeper on it. Are there things that you have found help people feel safe and empowered and ready to tell their story? Because if we have all these great stories, but they're locked away, then, it's hard to influence. And have you always been a great storyteller like you are now? Or is that something that had to develop for you in your career to recognize the power of story and to be comfortable sharing stories in that way?
So I think developing stories has been something that has evolved over time for me personally. Um, and I think it's also been part of our journey at Disability In because we're out there and as we expand and our network grows, not just with companies, but with people and with students and with business owners with disabilities, it's a matter of listening, right? Like connecting on a personal basis and listening to people's stories and then working to connect those dots, right? It's connecting this person with that person and spreading
Mm.
those seeds, whether it's inside a company. Sometimes these companies are so big, the
Yeah.
right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, right? And
Mm.
everything in between. And so sometimes we're connecting them with each other internally, and sometimes we're connecting them with each other in different places. And storytelling is a powerful thread that we want to continue to pull on because we want to make this human and we want to make, again, people feel and know that disability doesn't mean you're broken, right? It's a natural part of the human experience. We can be born with it. We can get sick. We can have an accident. I mean, my husband was able-bodied and then he was on a motorcycle and hit a palm tree. Now he uses a wheelchair, right? Like so disability comes in all different shapes and sizes.
Mm. You know, something you hit on there that I just think is really interesting for us to remember is you, as this powerhouse partner on the outside, are helping make connections inside of companies with people who are employed. You're not an employee there, and they're both employed there, and you're helping make connections on the inside because you see that there's a need for that, and you see that that creates that effect that you're looking for. It's a way that you influence. And I just think that's worth underscoring because it's something that I think many of us wouldn't think about as a way to provide support and as a way to influence to achieve, the action and then later the visibility that we're looking for. It's kind of funny that you're able to play that role as an outsider.
It's fun and it's effective,
Yeah.
right? There is nothing that we can really help. So for example, accessibility. Sometimes people think about accessibility like it's something for people with disabilities. versus thinking about that it's something for all of us, right?
Mhm.
So think about the curb cut, right?
Yeah.
Initially, it was about access for people with physical disabilities. But
Mhm.
now think about how that curb cut allows people to push a stroller, push a
Mhm.
shopping cart, pull a cart, pull your suitcase. Um, it's something that is at the intersection of everything. So as this outsider, we're constantly like working, we can go over to procurement and start planting seeds of accessibility about thinking about what your company's buying. Are you are you building accessibility into what you're buying? And they're like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And then we can draw, a line over here and say, "Gosh, this company and this company and this company are starting to build this accessibility into their RFPs and their RFQs. And I know you want to compete and win that business. So like what are you doing to get ready for that?" So it is fun. It's and effective to be on the outside and to connect those dots.
And I guess I'm wondering also on the inside, you mentioned earlier, over half of Gen Z identifies as being neurodivergent. And I wonder if you could share, how are you providing advice, or what advice are you providing to employers about how they can prepare environments and modernize their workplace and their culture so that the next generation can thrive, so that everyone can thrive, including those who identify as being neurodivergent.
So, just calling out again that the EY recently just came out with some research and really identifies that this talent group actually possess these important skills that business needs to transform their business over the next 10 years. All right. So if we're drawing attention to what companies need to do, Disability In recently came out with our own research in this vein, and we're calling on companies if things like training your managers, right? So training managers, that's one of the single greatest barriers that exists is um, not building neurodiversity into manager training. So, working on that, starting with an open approach to working practices, leveraging the power of AI in terms of helping employees communicate, updating outdated hiring and promotion systems, right? So that they value performance and creativity over things like, conventional social norms. So there are some very concrete actions that companies can take to not just be neural inclusive, but to get ready for this flood of talent that
Mm.
is coming your way if they're not already in your workplace.
Absolutely. Jill, what's one thing you want to make sure everybody knows about Disability In and what you're trying to achieve?
I want people to know what I is that disability is a strength and that it's something that adds value to business and that it is something that touches each of us. And when we talk about it, when we don't whisper, but when we talk about disability, people start to say, my child, my spouse, my neighbor, me, my friend, my sister. It is a single uniting force that is also a force that can advance innovation in business. And so it is a key ingredient. We are a key ingredient to driving change in business. And we have a lot of work to do. We're barely scratching the surface. We just got to keep going.
Mm. That is so powerful. I want to just close with one last question I just love to ask everyone. Um, I mean, you've had an incredible career. Obviously, you've evolved and grown through that career. How do you define influence today, and how has that definition evolved for you personally?
For me, I think influence is about using your power for good. I think it's about building trust
Yeah.
with people. It's about listening, not leading with what you want to say, but listening to what people have to say and then working to build, to be responsive and to build trust and a relationship with each other to, you know, collectively work to advance disability, inclusion, and accessibility for everybody.
Yeah, that's wonderful. As we bring this conversation to a close, I mean, we can just see why you are so recognized by so many other leaders, peer organizations, and the business community for your advocacy, but your exceptional ability to influence and the impact that you've made through that. What a great storyteller you are. You shared the story of the curb cut and you said, look, this was put in place for a specific purpose, right? Helping someone with a disability, physical disability navigate. But look at how it's had these benefits for all of us, whether you're dragging a suitcase or you have a stroller or, fill in the blank. And what a powerful illustration of how disability is a strength, what you said, and how through listening and through storytelling and finding those stories. And I just love how you gave examples through your illustrations of how people have been empowered to tell their stories, surprising their boss, not knowing that the number two had a disability, getting those interns to come in that inspired and showing the strength. And I think from this conversation and just looking at the incredible work of Disability In and the Disability Index that you're about to launch the new modernized version of, you really tell that story so well that disability is a strength and it creates opportunities for everyone if we make sure that we understand disability inclusion and we incorporate that into our work habits, whether it's from employment, procurement, you name it. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the work you do. And just thank you for demonstrating masterful storytelling today.
I want to say thank you to you and just a reminder that, it's not about me, right? It's a reflection of our movement and it's the disability and family. And we're on this journey together and we're going to keep trucking.
Well said. Thank you. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.